in my role as the co-chair of the Inter-Academies Partnership, but also representing ASAF, our National Academy. And this is a session which is entitled A Global Strategy to Combat Predatory Academic Journals and Conferences. In a moment, I'm going to just introduce and ask our speakers to come up and sit in the empty chairs. But let me just say that this is a session which we have thought about for a while, and here's why I think it's really important. This is something that people need to understand about, and in particular, those who are starting out in an academic career need to understand how to tell whether something is predatory, whether there is a risk, and they need to understand what the impact can be of falling prey to a predatory practice of some sort. It can have a very long-term impact on a career, on a track record, and for that reason I think that we probably don't say enough about to our developing researchers, to our early career academics, about what they need to understand and how they need to be able to detect any kind of predatory practices. So that's why we're having this very important session, and I'm very pleased to see that you are all here. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to just briefly tell you who our speakers are, and then I'm going to ask them to come up and sit in the chairs, and they will then each take a turn to present part of the thinking for this session. So our first speaker is Peter McGrath, who is the coordinator of the Inter-Academy Partnership. And he is going to, so he's the person who keeps us all in order. And he is going to give an introduction to a report that the Inter-Academies panel produced, and which is the basis for the content of what we're going to talk about today. Then we're going to ask Susan Veldsman, who's the director of the Scholarly Publication Unit in the Academy of Science of South Africa, and she is going to also present some of the content, give us a summary of what is in the report, and Susan has a presentation which she will use. And then we have Seppo. Oh, he is here still. Seppo Hatchingonta, who is Director for Strategic Partnerships at our National Research Foundation, and he has an interest in science, transdisciplinary science, and the African environment for science, technology, and innovation. So he will also give a view, perhaps partly based on the impact on funding of any kind of predatory practices. We then have Moses Samje, who is an Associate Professor of Biochemistry and Chair of the Department of Biomedical Sciences at the University of Bamenda, Cameroon, and he will give a view from his own national perspective. And then our fifth speaker is Dr. well, we call him Doyen Odubanju, who is the Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Academy of Science. So we have a very broad spread of speakers. They have much more to say than I need to say, so let me ask our speakers to come up and sit in the chairs, and I will then just invite them one at a time. Thank you. Okay, so first up, we have Peter McGrath from the Inter-Academy Partnership. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, in previous sessions I was able to see something in front of me, but so as was mentioned, I'm the coordinator of the Inter-Academy Partnership. I'm based in the Trieste office at TWAS, the World Academy of Sciences. Just a very brief introduction, one slide on IAP, the Inter-Academy Partnership. We are the global network of academies of science, medicine, and engineering. We now have 150 members. You can see the colored countries on the map here. And we work through 4 regional networks in the Americas, Europe, NASAC in Africa, and also in Asia. And we have 2 secretariats, one in Trieste, Italy, where I'm based, and one in Washington, D.C. with the US National Academies. And it's important to understand that these academies that are sort of behind this report are sort of independent academic organizations with the credibility to really sort of push forward the deliberations, the recommendations that are coming out from the report. We go on sort of giving the voice on issues of science for policy or policy for science. The report itself, we had the project director, Tracy Elliott. I'm sure some of you in the room know her. She's based in the UK. The principal investigator, Richard Catlow, was the former co-president of IAP. He's a member of the Royal Society. And we had a working group with 2 co-chairs, one of which, of course, is Susan Velsman here with us today. She'll go into much more depth on the report and the details. And the working group had 10 other members that sort of balanced across the geographies that represent IAP, so the different regional networks and so on. The report itself, the project was funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And I'll just keep going very quickly. This is the report itself. There is the full-length version for those who are really interested, and there's also sort of short summary versions available. And those versions, I'm jumping ahead of myself. As part of the project, the small grants were awarded to academies and young academies to carry out sort of national dissemination efforts in different countries. You can see here Bangladesh, the Czech Republic, Guatemala, Nepal, the Nigerian Academy of Sciences, and we'll hear more about that from Doyen later, and also in Sudan. My clicker isn't clicking. Hold on. Here we go. Yeah, so I mentioned, whoops, it's over-clicked, yes. So the summary report is available in the different UN languages, of English, of course, but also Arabic, Chinese, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish. So this is our effort to reach as many young scientists as possible around the world, making it easy for them to assimilate the information in this report. It's available, the website here, you can download it and take a look there. And I think I will stop there and hand over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan. Oh, Peter's a lot taller than me. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Susan now, and I just want to say, our speakers are all a little disconcerted because they can't see the screen because we haven't got a monitor here. So I don't think any of you are going to do presentations, but you are welcome to sit in the front row if you prefer, because Susan is going to now give us a more in-depth view of what is the content of the report. So apologies for the messing around, but we were not aware that there wasn't a monitor here. So thank you, Susan. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to my co-panel members, and thank you very much to all of you that's participating this morning in this session. This is a very important session, I think, and to raise awareness very specifically. And I hope by showing you the results, you will see actually the horrific impact that predatory journals have on the system of innovation and research output. And I don't think we actually realize how serious this is in the world. And I think especially for us in this particular group, and as Peter said, and maybe there's a little bit of duplication, I do apologize, but let's just sort of get into the things before I actually get to the results. As you can see, it was funded by the Betty the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, and we're forever grateful for that because it really allowed us to do our work. And we did this work in the midst of COVID-19. So everything was online. We did not eyeball each other at all, but I am very pleased and very impressed with what we actually accomplished during this time. It forced us to focus and to rely on all other methods to get the word out and to understand what is happening there. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic also had a very particular sort of influence, especially towards conferences. As before the COVID, you know, everybody went to conferences, etc., and there were some predatory activities there as well. But as soon as COVID started, it actually stopped. But now it's very interesting, and I would like to learn in going forward, what will happen now in going, you know, what will happen out there because of COVID? Is there new tricks up in their sleeves in terms of conferences? We don't know, but that certainly would be an interesting one. As you can see, it was a broad panel that actually participated in this report, and really we went to all outs of the globe, and that is from Ethiopia, the UK, Argentina, Benin, Sweden, Thailand, Jordan, Egypt, India, and then of course I was the co-chair with my Indian counterpart on this particular panel. So what were our objectives during this panel? Very interesting. Define predatory and unethical practices in academic journals and conferences. And I will speak a little bit about that. Because in my own mind, for me, and I think maybe I was naive, is that I wanted to separate the two. Predatory on the one hand side and unethical on the other. But I think for me personally, it was quite a revelation to understand that unethical practices are actually predatory. And I think that's what we have to change. And that's one very big message we have to bring back to our researchers out there and to our funders, etc. There's no excuse for being unethical because it does touch upon predatory practices as such. Then just to see what's their prevalence and what is their impact in the system. Examine the global efforts to date to combat predatory journals and conferences, and there are many out there. Understand the primary drivers or the root causes of predatory practices, and then to provide concrete recommendations for a global strategy to address the problem that engages all key stakeholders. And I think that's the one purpose of our meeting here this morning, is to make you understand the role that you have to play. So we have brought everything up to light now, and it's up to you to now create awareness and actually to help us fix the problem. So, as Peter has said, so there's a report. It has been translated, the executive summary, in 6 languages. So please make use of it. It's in Arabic, it is in Spanish, it is in Chinese, in English. So I think we actually went to great extent to ensure that the dissemination and the penetration of the results of this report is massive. So please have a look. It has gained quite some traction out there. We had a number of engagements, and I'm still being called upon making presentations at all sorts of conferences. So I think the word is spreading, and I think people are starting to understand what the actual impact is thereof. We're very proud to also say that in the UNESCO Open Science Toolkit, we have a little fact sheet there about predatory journals. So that was quite a landmark activity for us to be included in that. So please check it out. It's all on the website as such. So we had a look, and we looked at what are predatory practices. What are they? And why are they a problem? Because people ask, but then, so what? And we tried to answer that question. And how can we actually combat them? And we tried to address that as well. So, no, sir. Thank you. Sorry. So what are they? And I think just to highlight a couple of very particular behaviors and markers of predatory journals and of course conferences, is that the practices it's practices that deceive or mislead the researchers. They include fraudulent, low quality and unethical practices. As I said, low quality came up very strongly as being defined as predatory. Motivated by profit, not scholarship, and they exist worldwide. It's not just in certain countries, it is spread across the globe. And they are driven by the monetization, research metrics, and peer review capacity. And I think that's one single factor that really jeopardizes the whole system as a whole. So why are they a problem? What do they do? What did we find? Is that they damage careers. And I'll show you some anecdotes of researchers. And that was the second thing that really caught me in all the work that we did. It is so sad to see what people report. And I will show you a little bit later. And that is a damage being done forever. Nobody can actually repair it after the damage has been done. And hundreds of new predatory products every month, and they compromise millions of researchers, and they dupe new and established researchers. Extremely important. We must not think that it's only young, emerging researchers that are being conned in these practices. We found them all across the board. Although young emerging researchers are much more vulnerable, that is true. I will speak a little bit later about how we can combat them, and that's where I'm going to call upon you, that in your work that you actually do, sorry.
Susan, your slides are out of sync with what's on your screen. Do you want to go back a bit?
Oh dear.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. I'm so sorry. This is now the problem.
I know.
Thank you, Chair. Right, and this is what I'm saying. In our work, we discovered that unethical practices and predatory were actually the same coin, just different sides of the coin. And this is very important, is that you actually pay attention to this definition. You can see from the well in my screen, it's a very blood red on my left-hand side, and I think it's on your left-hand side as well, that then moves over and across to the greener area where it's high quality of journals. So you can see how we branded it from fraudulent to deceptive to unacceptable low-quality journals and low-quality journals. And we even went further to say there's even promising low-quality journals. Journals that are really trying their best, but still have those little things that they do that does not fit international standard. And then, of course, quality journals. And this is where local journals will have to be extremely careful. If we think about South Africa, we publish 320 scholarly journals in our country. It's massive. It's a lot. And we have to advocate for better quality of these journals, because some of them are, and we know, through the work we do in the academy, we know some of them are extremely low quality. And despite of having a code of best practice in place, still contravene sort of the best practice rules in our code of best practice, up to those journals which are really of high quality. So what do we perceive as high quality? So thorough peer review, strong editorial and advisory boards, very important for the editorial process, transparent, robust policy to ensure research and operational integrity. In other words, practice due diligence, transparent policy for retractions or refund, clear about costs, and take proper action when challenged. So you can already see the firmness in the editorial process and the openness and the transparency thereof, which we really want to call upon. So the survey we conducted, you can see it runs right across the world. So 80% of our respondents responded to say that they perceive predatory practices as a very serious problem, or even on the rise in their own country of work. So you can see there were actually very big participation, and if you ever participated in this questionnaire, I would really like to thank you for that. So what were the survey headlines? As I said, researchers at all career stages need to be on their guard. and researchers in low and middle income countries, we did find that they were more vulnerable. Some disciplines, and that was also very interesting, are more vulnerable than others. We found that the researchers in arts and humanities was associated with more predatory journals, whilst research in transdisciplinary and engineering sciences with predatory conferences. That was really quite a landmark. So at least 14% of respondents admit they've used predatory journal conferences. But now the next most upsetting thing, and that's the thing, is that we never quantify our behavior to monies. We really tried in the program to get some sort of formula to show the world, if you engage in predatory practices, how much will it cost? So the best we could sort of equate it to is to say, if we think that 14% of our respondents say that there are predatory practices happening in their countries, this equates to over 1.2 million researchers of the 8.8 million around the world. So that means it's billions of dollars of research costs. So you can already see that the percentage of researchers engaging is massive. And if you equate it to monies and research funding, etc., it even escalates in terms of its monies. Now, this is the part that really broke my heart in this project, is to see the anecdotes of researchers, and especially emerging young researchers, in what they experienced. It has delayed my PhD completion. I mean, how sad is that? We cannot put ourselves out there for failure. And then somebody said, unfortunately, I had over 20 to 25 papers sacrificed in these journals. They can't be considered for promotion. And I became a questionable researcher everywhere in my CV, where my CV goes. So it's highly problematic. That follows you wherever you go in your career. And can you retract it? We find no. It sticks in the web, it sticks to your name, it sticks to records, etc. So the 24 respondents have either published in a predatory journal or participated in a predatory conference, or actually don't know if they have. So that was also interesting. So they were not aware. They needed to advance their career. It was a faster and easier and a cheaper option to do that. And they were encouraged by their peers. So can you see the drive? What researchers have to face to actually get out there and to publish. Publish or perish. That was the biggest driver for this one. So what is the drivers and the root causes? It's a monetization and the commercialization of research output, especially with the author-based model. So we, and I'm saying especially for places like the Academy of Science of South Africa, we are the drivers of open science and open access in the country. Now we are faced that specifically open access journals, they face a problem. So if you're an open access journal, you have to prove that you're not, and you've got to be open and of a very particular quality. And we cannot just say it's easy and we're going to publish it. Research evaluation systems, and that aspect is coming up time and again during the World Science Forum. We'll have to look at alternative research evaluation systems that do not place so much emphasis on high impact journals, etc. So that whole system will have to be questioned, and maybe an alternative will have to be developed. And the lack of transparency. That's what's open science about. It's open, open, open. I remember years ago when I developed a lot of slides for open access, etc. And it was sort of the breaking ground in South Africa about open repositories. And I said, but now I have to share all my notes. And this person said, really? And you're advocating for open? I mean, open is open and open and open, and I think that is the one big message also from this conference. I'm almost done, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Right, let's just have a look at what is it that we expect you for doing and going home and going back to your institutions? I see a lot of people here from research offices. I also see some researchers and I see some other advocates in the room for better quality, at least local journals, etc. We have to work collaboratively to raise awareness about predatory practices. The repercussions of not addressing them on time and they will threaten both society and the sciences. It really taints our industry. Avoid engaging with and legitimizing predatory journal and conference. So spread good practice. I think that must be a core of our advocacy message. Promote open science and reduce commercialization and monetization in the academia, including to move towards alternatives to the author pays model. Reject the overuse and reliance on quantitative metrics in research evaluation, instead using them more rationally and intelligently, and promote ways of recognizing research quality. And then strengthen the institution of transparent peer review. So if you can't read it as straight as that, we're starting to encourage you to consider open peer review in your scholarly publishing and accepting of articles. And that was really just meant to give you a flavor of the actual report, and I hope you feel motivated to go and read it in depth, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susanne. We're going to go on and have the rest of our speakers. We will have some questions and some discussion at the end. But if I could now ask Seppo Hatchigonta to come and yes, if the other speakers would like to come up. And Seppo is going to talk from the point of view of the National Research Foundation and a funder's viewpoint. So over to you, Seppo. Thank you.
Trust you are well. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this event, and I was also honored to be part of the review team when the report was being done, and it was a very interesting exercise. And just to start with, I'll speak with the lens of a funder, because if you speak of the topic today, research funders will play a very key role with regards to how we fund and ensuring that whatever we fund, there's excellency in terms of the publications outputs that come out of the research that we fund. In addition to that as well, we need to build that trust with regards to the outputs that come out of the research that we fund. And if we don't do that, then we lose the trust in terms of the public, not having trust in the science system, so that's very critical. Secondly as well, if you speak of the money, we use public money to fund. So as Suzanne said earlier on, if we don't put in mechanisms to ensure that we don't combat these type of practices, we are basically losing money as a system. We are losing money as society because that taxpayers' money. So it's very critical to ensure that we come up with tangible ways of addressing these issues. My points, I'll speak just broadly on 4 points. The first one is the role that science funders can play in terms of responding to these issues. If you speak of science funding now, it's more than just the funding of research, but funding of research is at the core of it. Besides that, science funders now, we e.g. are participating in policy advisory, some funders participate in that, others science communication. So science funders come in different shapes and forms, that's the point I want to put through. But besides that, if you speak of the grant management aspect of science funders, that's at the heart of most science funders. If we can put in systems before we even fund that are able to pick up some of these predatory journals through, for instance, the panel reviews that happens within the science funding entities if applicants are applying, for instance, for conferences, or they're applying for research, and they've added some of the publications. I think some of these issues can be flagged within that process before the application happens, before the application for funding goes ahead. So that's very, very critical, I think, from the funding lens. A lot of discussions happening around open science, as you stipulated, because there's lots of linkages between the push for publish or perish, push for open access, but there's still a lot to be done, again, with regards to open science and open access. Open access doesn't mean it's free. Somebody has to pay for it. So we need to look at how do we put in mechanisms to even look at incentives, being clear on the messaging to say, yes, it's open access. From the funding perspective, we put in mechanisms that are able to assist researchers, both in terms of publishing, as well as just being aware of where they are publishing. The third point speaks of the need for the sharing of information. In most cases, we don't share a lot of information. So we speak in silos, both in terms of the sectors within the government or within the national system of innovation. You find researchers, each university, it's on its own, speaking on its own. Within the department ministries, there's no linkages. Within academies, within councils, NRF, maybe ASAF, there's no that alignment and pipeline in terms of sharing information and systematic designing of processes. You find that in that just that instance of not sharing information, there are gaps that happen within that system. Within that system, if you don't talk, you don't know opportunities that are there within ASAF. You don't know if another research funder has a database, for instance, on predatory journals, or they've listed it. So you just continue supporting that. So I think the value of sharing information can never be understated. We need to start sharing information across the many sectors, as well as up between universities, researchers, academies, funding, not just at a national level, but within the region and globally. I think that's very, very critical. The fourth point is mostly linked to, it's more the communication aspect as well. And it's good that we did this study, because if you look at the definitions, if you ask people what's a predatory journal, most people do it not because they want to do it, but because they don't know what a predatory journal is, they don't know what the predatory conference is. So the lack of definition, the lack of understanding from the research, especially emerging researchers, it was very much highlighted here. And that now brings in the issue of how do we ensure that we are always communicating as well with the clear definition of what it means to be a predatory journal and, or conference. What does it mean? Where are they? And how do we define that? From the funding lens, that as well means that, e.g. from the NRF, putting in very clear guidelines and processes within the funding agency that are able to guide those processes going forward. I'm happy to say within South Africa, through the Department of Higher Education, we have a database of journals that are credible, that researchers have to use if they want to get accreditation based on their publication that they have. That's a starting point. But most researchers are not even aware of that. So we need to spread the message that they are tools, but still they have to grow. We need to share these platforms, not just in South Africa, across the region, internationally, so that at least we're able to communicate the right message, and we just don't pinpoint to say, you're publishing in a predatory journal or you're going to a predatory conference. We make this information available as much as possible to all communities. I'll stop here for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sepa. Every time somebody speaks about these matters, you start making notes about all of the things that are implications for all of this. I'm going to ask Professor Moses Samje now, who is the Cameroon affiliate for the Africa Academy of Science, to put across a kind of academic view. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be talking on strategies which can be put in place to minimize the risk of falling prey to predatory journals or conferences by early career researchers, as well as the role of the government in combating these predatory journals. Some few years back, after doing some work, so I got so excited, and we were looking for a journal to get the work published. When we searched, we saw a very nice journal that has published similar work. More so, I saw a senior colleague who has published in this journal. The impact factor was quite attractive, 6.22, and it was too good to be true, because when I checked the quality of the work published, it didn't tie with the impact factor. We gave a try, and we submitted the paper. In the space of 24 hours, we were asked to pay the article processing charge, which was, again, quite low and affordable. Naively, we paid. And in less than 48 hours, we received an email, your paper is online. It was quite exciting. So I decided to go online to check the content of the paper. I realized that the date of submission, date of acceptance, and date of publications didn't match with what I knew. There was a discrepancy. We got a report that a peer review took months, and to the best of my knowledge, it was just a few days. It was then that I knew that we were falling prey to this questionable journal. So from the early career research perspective, I think the first thing is ignorance and inexperience. I was acting, or we're acting naively without knowing, and the first thing that our institution can do is to really create more awareness. And by awareness, it's not just about having all these documents in the internet. At the level of the institution, there should be regular sensitization through seminars and conferences that will help guide researchers on these predatory journals and how to avoid them. And this can also be done by regularly updating the list of predatory journals in institutional websites, as well as sending hard copies to help researchers. We also understand that our institutions, some of them though, provide incentive to researchers to publish. That's a very good initiative. But sadly, most of the institutions don't do a follow-up to see where the end product of this research has been publicized through publication. And therefore, it's very important for institutions to serve kind of the role of an auditor to see where researchers publish and the journals where the papers are published. So follow-up is very, very important. One of the reasons why, especially early career researchers publish in this journal is because of disappointment. You can imagine submitting a good manuscript to a paper, to a journal, and it's rejected. You're kind of frustrated. At the same time, you are under pressure, receiving unsolicited emails from journals telling you we can publish in less than no time. And therefore, this temptation is high, and the researcher is vulnerable to this. So because of that, you find many people submitting their paper to these journals. It's therefore important that at the level of the institution, an enabling environment through regular funding in this African context, as well as accessibility to equipment, be made available so that researchers also embark on high quality data generation for publication. In that case, the data generated won't be questionable so that you are in a mad rush to get it published anywhere. And therefore, if the institution can help, again, provide more financial support to researchers to help them do good data, good science, as well as generate good data, it will be very, very helpful in combating this. Universities personnel are always in a hurry to get promoted, and again, the publish or perish syndrome come into play. So everybody wants to get promoted, and the yardstick for measurement in most of our institutions is always the number of publications and not the quality of the publication. This is a very, very big problem, and because of this, we directly or indirectly help the predatory journals to flourish because we want to get the number of publications required. And therefore, it is imperative that our universities should review their criteria for promotion. I think emphasis should be more on quality instead of quality. And when quality is given an upper hand over quantity, the researchers, most of them will sit up, and by sitting up indirectly, these predatory journals will be starved, and some can get discouraged, and the fight will be successful. Last but not the least, I will talk about mentorship. Again, a couple of years back, I was assigned a student to mentor in the laboratory, and he was so excited. After a series of experiments, he wrote the first manuscript. We reviewed, we identified a journal, And of course, we had to provide report to the head of the lab. And he asked one question: is that journal index in PubMed? That was enough to solve the problem and to help us fall in the hands of these questionable journals. And once the answer was no, we had to look for something else. So I think mentorship is very important, especially for the early career researchers, in helping to avoid these journals. And by mentorship here, we are talking of mentors who have track records in reputable journals, who are published in reputable journals, because as Susan Riley presented, everybody is prone to this. And I felt pretty the first time because I saw a senior colleague published in this journal. And therefore, mentorship for the young researchers is absolutely important in order for them to prevent the temptation of falling prey either to these journals or conferences. I think with that, I'll stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just our last speaker for this round is Dr. Doen Odubanjo, who is the Executive Secretary for the Nigerian Academy of Science. And you're going to provide a kind of a broader, I think, institutional and academic view. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the good or bad side of speaking last is that you can say they've said it all. You know, so I'm kind of going to be rephrasing largely, and maybe add just one or 2 points, you know, to what's been said. The challenge for us, I mean, particularly Nigeria is hit particularly hard with the predatory journals and conferences. We have a fair share, relatively fair share, significantly high of people published in those journals, and even of publishers, you know, in Nigeria. So we have a particularly big problem. And that's the interest for the Academy of Science in Nigeria. So we've had a webinar. The attendance alone, you know, relative to other webinars, that was earlier this year, the country had opened up. You know, once the country, I mean, everywhere is opening up, attendance at webinars have been falling. You know, so, but then we had a relatively high attendance, which told us there was something here, you know, to really discuss. And we went on. After that one, we had a meeting with the stakeholders, you know, principal stakeholder groups, that's the university leaders and things, to discuss this problem. And there were a number of things that really came out. And the key thing for us was, how do we address it? You know, and we will still have a consensus study to further deeper into this problem in Nigeria. But what do you do? So for me, I like to put it this way, that you can think of it like you think of a problem, like prostitution or drug abuse. You know, you look at the demand and the supply. You know, so what do you address? Do you address the supply? Or do you address the demand? Perhaps it's easier to address the demand side of things, the supply side. They only take tactics, as it were. You know, so they go underground, they change how they attract people. The things keep changing. So what do you do? So on the demand side are some of the many things that have been said today. And I think that, yes, it bears repeating to talk about how we actually promote academics within the system. You know, what do we do? What kind of pressure are we putting them under? And do we have fair assessment systems, you know, for them? I think Moses had been looking in my notes when he was speaking, you know, because he virtually just reeled out everything I had listed out here. And I thought, I need to cover this from this guy, you know. What's he doing here? You know, and, you know, so you look at the quantity-quality thing. Even at the level of the academy, it's still an issue, a constant debate. That are we looking at just the quantity of papers this person has? And bigger still, how do we assess the quality? You know, there are now questions about the H index, about the citation index. There are questions. Are they fair assessment tools to use? How fair are they? How accurate are they? You know, so it gives us a very complex problem to deal with. However, we mustn't shy away from it. We still have to address it. You know, because that's where the problem lies. If we're going to take care of the demand, that's where the problem lies. So the scientist, the researcher is trying to publish as many as possible each year, so it keeps moving up the ladder. I mean, I said, and I get the privilege of looking at the papers submitted for fellowship in the academy, for instance. And sometimes I'm looking at it and I'm shaking my head. And I'm like, he's a professor. No, it can't be, And sometimes I've had to speak to young scientists in the young academy and things. And I said to them, I've seen some of the papers of your professors. Don't be like that. Be careful not to build your career that way. Be careful, that when you reach that level, you really have something to stand on. So that's key there. I think also we need to start looking at the place of the local journals. Because there's the pressure for people to publish in international journals. So we're getting them publishing in the International Journal of Paleontology or American Journal of Paleontology, which is actually published in India. But it's international. So that's the man wants it to read not Nigerian journal. He wants it to read American journal. But he didn't realize that it was a Chinese journal, that was published in China. But then also sometimes the assessors are seeing, international American and saying, good. And that's a problem. And digging further backwards is to say that this person sometimes is doing good work, like he said, but he's not also going to get published in some of the reputable journals because they say his work is on Nigeria. We're not interested. So there's the pressure of he's done good work, but nobody wants it. If he publishes it in the Nigerian journal, they say, no, that's not good enough. So how do we create, promote, recognize local journals and strengthen them? I mean, Susan talked about the weaknesses of some of the journals, but don't let's throw away the baby with the bathwater. How do we actually fish out the good ones, promising ones, and strengthen them, help them with the processes to say, we like what you're doing, we think it's important, we think it's relevant, this is what you need to do more, to make this journal very good. And who cares if you're not even on the indexing platform, sorry, forgive me if you're from PubMed, like PubMed. If at the end of the day I'm going to get the best of medical research in Nigeria from an indexing platform in Nigeria, from a journal published in Nigeria, why not? Why must it be on PubMed before it's recognized? So maybe we also need to have local indexing platforms that are really good. So we need to look at how those things are done. Of course, there's the issue of money, which was raised earlier, because you must sustain, they publish it, it costs money to do that. So again, I like institutions like ASAF, would probably have their own funding. They're not for profit. Nigerian Academy is not for profit. So such institutions have a very good chance to publish journals that would not be driven by, profit, as it were, and stand a good chance to publish the very good, reputable journals that we're talking about as a start. Others can do it, but I'm saying that we need to start looking at such institutions and others that can, to say you don't need, you're not looking for the money, but can you fill the space for us? Okay? And I'll say that in orientation, of course, Moses also referred to that and others referred to that earlier. Even Seppo talked about that from the funding perspective. So the younger researcher tends to fall prey more often. Okay, so on recruitment, how do we, create orientation programs that ensure that people know all of these things, even perhaps before recruitment, at postgraduate level, at the very least? How do we integrate this into the courses, into the teachings that people go through? Journals, how you know the good journal platforms to publish in? We need to start integrating some of those things, because that kind of person is probably going to spend his life or our life, publishing. So they need to start hearing those things and recognizing those things. And the last point, again, I underscore the point of mentorship. Because sometimes, and I'm sure many of us know that, sometimes a young researcher has done good work, written it very well, but he still struggles to publish. Because his name is not recognized. And yet there are people publishing good work, maybe not as good, but good work still. But the moment they send in a paper and they see that name, you know that there is a very, very good chance that paper will be published because of that author or that person's name in that paper. And that's why you tend to publish with the established researcher, and his name is on that paper. So we need to look at mentorship and get people to start mentoring the younger researchers to properly, because part of the challenge we would face, for instance, is that the young researcher is doing a lot of good work, but he always appears as the last on the authorship list, gets the least credit, even though he did all the work. So again, in proper mentorship, the real mentor says, your name goes first, it's your work. But my name will be on there because they know my name. And they know that if my name is there, it's an endorsement of quality. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to pose a couple of questions to our panel, just to start the discussion, and then we will open it up. But whoever's brave enough can answer this one first. If you let us consider the financial aspects of this. If you are wanting to publish a paper on the pay-to-publish basis, some journals charge the most astounding amounts of money for publishing. Now, how do we manage that in terms of getting things published and avoiding the predatory practices? I just want to add to that calculation that has been done and talked about, the model that we hear about often, is that if you took all the money in the world that academic organizations pay for subscriptions to journals, if you took all that money and turned the model around, it would pay enough to publish without the authors having to pay. In other words, if the publishing companies were not there for the profit, we could actually pay the costs of publication from the money that we already in our institutions have in the system. But that isn't what we have, and I don't think that we are anywhere near flipping that model at this stage. So how do we manage the cost part of this without endangering ourselves going into predatory publishing? I don't know, Susanne, if you want to start on that one, or Seppa?
I can start, but you've partly started answering it. I think there's no one solution for that question. And we are all aware that if you look at the publication model, as Dwayne said, it's a business model. Okay, I'm sure are there any publishers here? But basically, there's demand for it. And unfortunately, researchers, we are very bad at doing anything business. We're just too focused at doing our own research. We publish, we do the review, and we pay for our reviews to be published. So, and that's where we are at. I think this is a frank conversation we need to be having with the publishing houses, where we should be looking at where we meet in the middle. Yes, they provide a very good service with regards to the online platform, the IT platforms that we use to publish, but the research system is supposed to be owning that process. We always, as I said, we work in isolation mostly. So one of the solutions, whether it's at a national level, regional level, we need to start joining hands, whether it's universities, research funders, even the publishers. If you speak as a team, if you speak collectively, you have a bigger bargaining power if, e.g., you are negotiating an agreement with a publisher. So that's just one solution. I think my colleagues can add more.
Anyone else?
Thank you. So yesterday afternoon, there was another session about open access in the Global South. And there were a lot of discussion about these transitional and transformative agreements by consortiums, etc. So the head of the Stellenbosch Library, who's also in an advisory capacity heading up the Sandley Consortium of South Africa, reported that they are having very tough negotiations with both Elsevier and Springer, and that through that transformative agreements that they did manage to negotiate article processing charges for free to allow the researchers of institutions to actually just publish their articles in those journals should they be accepted. So I think that's one very big step. It does need consortium, and consortium participation does need broad buy-in and broad input, and again, broad participation by all the institutions involved. So I certainly think that is a way. But I also think this gives impetus then to open access publishing, and that is the area that we as ASAF also embark in to understand the costs of publishing. And I think this is part of the open science and the open access movement, is that we actually understand what is the cost of publishing? And if that's the cost of publishing, in which way do we recuperate our costs? And I think, and not necessarily be for-profit driven, because I think that's what's driving the prices of journals, etc. So we embark on an open access process, which is, as you can see, it's ridden with all sorts of challenges. And it puts so much pressure actually on the system, you know, to do the right thing. And then, of course, to understand what does it cost to publish, and actually then just recuperate those costs. Then, and now's the question, who do you recuperate it from? Where do you get it from? Do you get it from your author? Or is it institution pay? And I think we think more in line with actually institutions should pay and facilitate the process of open access publishing. But it is a very complex. The business model of open access is extremely complex. And you're right. I think it's only all these international sort of initiatives, if we look at alternative evaluation methods, open review, etc. It's when we join them and we get sort of the impetus in this way that we'll see movement and changes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So I was once on a committee where we're organizing a workshop and for the academy, and we're now selecting speakers. And my chair, suggested somebody to speak. And again, the academy model, you don't pay for people to speak. So when he then asked me the question, how much would the academy pay? And I said, no, the academy doesn't pay. And he said, well, you won't be able to get this guy or good speakers. You won't get the best speaker. So I said, sir, we'll get the next best. So I think, again, referring to the business model, I mean, if it's a business, it has to be competitive. So if one is too expensive, go to the next best. You don't, and if they realize that people are not publishing there, you have good work, you publish it in the next best journal. Whoever needs it will access it there. And if they start realizing that their own impact factor and everything else, visibility is dropping because the best papers are going elsewhere, I will expect as businesses, they will figure out that it's their price. And they may have to, they'll be forced to drop that price if they're good business people. So even going from the business perspective, they have to be competitive. And the users can force them, to be competitive and drop the prices.
Thank you. Then there's one other aspect that we have heard mentioned, but we haven't actually discussed, and that is what impact open review might have. So instead of the closed, confidential, double-blind kind of peer review processes that are customary, if we have open peer review, is that going to help? How is that going to make any difference?
It's dead. For you, it's dead. Oh, it's back. Open reviews. So just to define, if you speak of open reviews, it's basically, the reviewers who are reviewing your article. And then there's what we follow now, mostly it's blind reviews, where, yes, to some extent it will make a difference, but that's not the only, so it depends. That's not the only solution, because where we need to be going, number one, is to grow the cohort of reviewers. For me, with regards to whether you know who's reviewing your article and direct implications with regards to whether you're publishing in a predatory journal for a conference, etc. It's not that direct, and remember, all these issues as well, they are linked to other policies at a national level with regards to identity. We've got a pop here in South Africa now. So there's implications to that. I'm not seeing a direct link, but it's there in the report. Suzanne, I think you touched on it. Maybe you can expand on it.
Thank you, Sepu. You know, this whole thing about open peer review, in a sense, is actually quite revolutionary. In Africa, we have the Open Research Africa platform, and there are a couple of papers being published there, and the open peer review model is being followed there. And people do participate, although I find there's quite a lag, you know, and coming from a publishing sort of environment and knowing the pressure that's on us and as an organization in our South African Journal of Science, you know, you've got to please publish in as quick as possible. I must say there's a lag on open peer review, and it takes time for the community to actually adjust and to adapt to that particular module. It is really quite different. Yes, it does open up quite a lot of processes. It does put people's names out there. And you know, people feel quite exposed by that particular system. Although I think just to curb other sort of, gatekeeping within the peer review process, I think it is a way to sort of open it up. I think the one problem I have with it is when it sits in an open repository, and although it is approved in the end, it's still very difficult for the system out there to accept that that repository serves like a mega journal. And then there's a lot of still, you know, we don't have many early adopters in that field. It is actually quite problematic, because I can imagine that actually that article, it seems that it tends then to move to other journals. Of course, it must be subjected then again to another review process. I mean, for instance, SIJS, we accept repositories, but when it comes into our journal, it goes through another review, and the author must accept if it's not being accepted. So there's a little bit of disjunct still in the system, and I think that makes me still a little bit nervous about the system, although in principle I believe it should bring to the fore. Your question about does it touch upon POPI, etc. Well, I think there are ways in terms of our protection of personal information, how you can actually get around it by disclaimers up front, you know, when people publish or put their names, etc. But the system is so open that you can still choose whether you want to put your name to it or not. Otherwise, you can just publish your actual review. Thank you.
I'm going to open it up now to the audience for questions, and I have to come down and hand you the microphone. So there's now one here for you guys to share. And we're never going to get through all of these questions, but your hand was up first. Please just say who you are briefly.
Okay. Samih Sarou from Egypt. Thank you very much for the IAP, for ringing the bell. I think this is a good start, and it needs a lot of work to follow up afterwards. We talked about assessment, and I think we have developed different matrices, and it is exactly like when we discovered the nuclear energy and then exploded in our faces. We have H-index and different matrices, and now also universities and institutes are competing because of the ranking, and you have to do and perform regardless of the quality. And this brings us down and not up. So we have to find out a way to change the assessment of, instead of this flat matrices, to find a way to assess the impact. If we turn into assessment the impact and find a good way to do this, I think this will be an efficient thing. I agree completely with Dwayne when he said institutes, academic institutes, universities, academies should be able to provide an alternative for predatory journals. This is one thing. The last thing I would like to share with you, in Egypt, we had a good experience. Actually, we stopped paying any subscription from institutes to any journals. We have a nationwide subscription through the EKB, Egyptian Knowledge Bank, and then if you are sitting at home, you can open any open access or not open access from Elsevier, Springer, and many other big publishers. And recently, I think started mid last year, the SDF, the main funding organization in Egypt, started to have a contract for paying the publication fees in reputable journals. You just have to submit your high quality paper. If it gets accepted, you don't have to bother yourself of anything as an author or a researcher. They take care of everything. I think this will help to improve the situation, at least in Egypt.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 or 3 comments or questions, and can I ask you please to try to keep them brief? President.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the panel for very insightful discussion. Doyan mentioned that perhaps accrediting local journals may help, and I believe so. I believe so. In 2014, when I was executive director of the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences, I came to South Africa to ASAF for a visit, and Suzanne introduced me to their journal evaluation project, and she also showed me how the Department of Higher Education and Research here accredits journals. When I returned, I wrote a project proposal, and with that project proposal, we evaluated about 40 of our journals in Ethiopia. We produced a report, a book, which actually Suzanne evaluated. And then my academic convinced the government and the Ministry of Science and Higher Education to establish an agency that will accredit journals, which they did. And now we have about 20 of our journals accredited, and their subscription and their submissions have increased. I think this is one way to give platform for early researchers also to publish in their own journals. The other is to have also a kind of an African journals index, similar to the one the Latin Americans have, which has been very successful. So I think we should create more ways so that the young researchers and also senior ones have access to publish in their own environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll just take one.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Linda Palm. I'm from Ghana. I work in a research institution. I have quite a number of things to talk about, but to keep it short, I would want to ask the question, which umbrella is in charge of research institutions? Which umbrella regulates what various research institutions do? Because you are applying for promotion, and then they come back to tell you that the criteria has changed. You don't know why it has changed. Maybe things have changed on the international level, and so they have changed. So you have to come back and review your stuff and reapply. So there's a delay, and so I want to know whether it's so which umbrella helps in such regulations. And secondly, I also wanted to find out with funding of various publications and conferences. I had an experience. We had a funder. We were doing the work, but when it came to funding for the conference and publishing of papers, there was the mails were going back and forth, and then they missed the deadline. So now it had to be on us to apply to pay for it to be published. So whether there's anything like the funder was talking about, as how much or to what extent can they go to fund the publications of the projects they themselves are funding? Thank you.
Okay, I can attempt to answer the first question. Which umbrella regulates the rules or regulations for promotion? I think it's in a context. For each institution or nation, you have the body that regulates or that put forth the rules and the conditions to be fulfilled. In my country, in Cameroon, for example, is a Ministry of Higher Education that gives the requirements, and it's always updated, and universities as well as research institutes are always updated on the new requirements that have been put forward. So I think for your country or your institution, there should be a body that is regulating promotion, and it's good to always get in touch with that body to get updates about the new requirements. About funding?
Yes, I can touch a bit on funding, and just to emphasize the point, each country has got its own regulations and policies guided by ministries, but even each institution, they've got different, they're on different indices or whatever they use for career advancement, etc. That's why, that's one of the challenges that we have from the regional perspective. You find somebody can be a professor at University X, where somebody who's got almost the same qualifications as an early career researcher. So I think there has to be that consolidation of some of these systems at a regional level. Funding as well is similar. In South Africa, for instance, the NRF, we fund the majority of research and mobility. If you look at the mobility funding, it's always open, very competitive. The other question was linked to if we fund, we put in incentives for publishing. We've got a bit of a disjoint in South Africa. At the moment, we are working on an open science policy, so we don't yet have an open science policy. There's a policy, it's in draft format, which is being led by our Department of Science and Innovation. The whole essence of that as well is to look at how we can consolidate some of these aspects. For instance, incentives aligned to publications are within another a subsection of the Ministry of Education, so the Department of Higher Education. The NRF, we're a fund of research. We don't give any incentives with regards to publications, so that's a disjoint. So there's some things that we're discussing and how we can start aligning all these different aspects, especially working with academies as well. Thanks.
Can I, before I take another question, just ask Peter if you'd like to just make a comment about the role of academies and networks of academies.
Sure. Well, let me just add in answer to the last question with my other hat at the TWAS, the World Academy of Sciences. For more than 10 years now, when they are funding research grants for young scientists in low and middle income countries, there is always a part of that grant reserved to help with the author processing charges. So that's something we brought in a number of years ago as a sort of funder donor. But also it depends on our original donor, which is the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. So that's one model that is, it's not unique to TWAS as well. The role of academies here, I mean, we've touched on the raising of awareness. Academies themselves, as you've mentioned, they are based on excellence. Electing the most prominent scientists in their countries. These are the professors that should be the mentors, if you like. So there's a role sort of in their own institutions. They reach into a lot of universities and research centers in the different countries. Just maintaining that excellence, promoting that excellence, making sure that their young scientists, their PhD students are vigilant, they're aware of the issues. When it comes to predatory journals, choosing a journal in which to publish, whether it's a local one, an international one, but we heard international isn't necessarily a great label. Anybody can call their journal international. I mentioned in my brief introduction that we had a number of small research grants that were given out, and I can't remember which one. I think it was the one maybe to the Czech Young Academy that produced a poster, which was very nice. And I think one thing that we might be able to do is take that poster and sort of make sure it is internationally valid and make it available on our website, and encourage every university department to have this displayed on their notice board, whether it's Department of Chemistry, Physics, botany, whatever it might be. Just to keep the message in people's faces, if you like, so they see it every day and they pass it when they have the coffee in front of it. I think this is a way that that we can make people aware and continually aware, because sometimes we're aware this week and then next week we forget. So this can be a problem.
Respond and then
Just to add in a word on the role of academies, I think while there are many institutions in countries that regulate and all of that, many people have lost faith in those systems. So the academies as unbiased entities that have the regard of the community and can be viewed as supreme courts of science, stand a chance, to intervene in that sector by suggesting, and I use that word carefully, standards, but by virtually suggesting, like ASAF did, by suggesting the standards, actually it's taken very seriously, even by the regulatory bodies. So they don't have the powers to enforce it, but when an academy does a study like the one on scholarly publishing and says these are the ways to identify, these are the standards for promotion, I think everybody will take note of it because that's the Supreme Court of Science speaking. And I think academies need to be strengthened and need to intervene in that sector much more.
Thank you for that point. I'll take this one question here and then I promise I'll come over.
Thank you. My name is Euclides Sakomboy. I am from Angola, Agostinho Neto University. When you are talking about the predator journals, I am thinking that you are talking about me. Yeah, because I am victim of predator journal. I have 3 papers in predator journals. Because why? I think the first problem is vulnerability. We don't have money to pay in best journal. My first papers was accepted in infection disease. They want to pay 2,060 euro for publication. My salary don't pass $500. How I can pay one paper in this journal? Because that I chose one journal where is more cheap and there is a predator journal. What I can do? I need to share my paper because I lost many time to do this research, and I need to share with community, and I have this problem. Another thing I think is the opportunity. If you have opportunity to publish your paper in one journal, you know that this journal is open, people could see your result. You don't want to know if he is predator or not predator. You want to share your data. The journal have opportunity to put us public our papers in this journal because they give us opportunity to share our data. We know that maybe could be a predator, but you have the opportunity to share. And you have your data, you can share with another people. Another thing, I think have one, I can say, preconcept, scientific preconcept in some journals. You send one paper, good paper for one journal, if he know that is from Angola, is from somewhere, don't give the same importance if it's the same paper from Europe or another country. You can see, I sent for one journal, one paper of human data, malaria and problems in malaria. They publish in the same issues one data of mouse, malaria in mouse, but don't accept our paper. Don't believe that we can do this project. We have the same ability to do the research. It's because that the predator journal has increased because the beta journal have many problems with the research. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go over here. I'll come back. I want to ask a question as I pass, panel. Who reads the predatory journals? Yeah. That's, I think, something we need to actually think about. Your hand's been up a while. Please, as you can.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Ijara Anthony from Uganda, from a research institution. When I hear about these predatory journals and then the competent and genuine journals, so I ask myself oftenly, who then licenses the journals? Who regulates? Are there associations? Are there checks internationally? Is there a punishment associated to a predatory journal? Going forward, how can we regulate this? Because it's going to worsen and it's getting worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody like to take that? Okay, let's go with this one.
Hi, I'm Paula Sena. I'm the Research Integrity Manager at the University of Cape Town. I have a long list, but I'll narrow it down to two. I'll make it two. So a very general question for the panel, whoever wants to tackle it, is we've talked a lot about researcher assessment and how we should reward researchers for impact rather than quantity. There are two declarations that exist already. There's the San Francisco DORA Declaration for Research Assessment and also the Hong Kong Principles for Researcher Assessment, and they're both very well aligned. So I'm wondering if those declarations played a role in the development of the report that was developed. And then the second one is maybe more direct for Susan or Seppo, is apart from the report, which I've had a brief skim through, is amazing. What other resources are there available? I'm a research integrity manager. I deal with developing researchers and empowering them. I do seminars. I have a website. I have online courses. How am I going to get these people to pay attention and not fall victim of predatory journals?
Start with the last ones, tough questions. I think it's not just from the NRF lens, but how we engage with the different universities. Funders, I think we play a very big role, considering that we get money and we support the universities. So just by virtue of being in that position of supporting the science system, I think there's more that we need to be doing with regards to predatory journals or conferences besides just coming up with grants. As I say, there's a lot happening in the system at the moment as well within the NRF. There are those discussions with regards to developing, it's a broader umbrella of open science policies, but within it we embed a few things linked to predatory journals. In South Africa, as I said, we have a database where you can go to say, you have to publish in this list of journals. So that guides a bit, so you can't, just go astray. But besides that, I think the bottom line is looking at the bigger picture. It's not just one element. It's very huge. So trying to look at a holistic approach of it, where there's all these, e.g., academies. We start developing more journals within the region, within the countries, because in most cases you find there's a researcher doing malaria studies. They can't find a journal to publish in Southern Africa. And of course, it's very expensive if you go via the other open access routes, because the author has to pay. So there's no options. You find that they end up publishing because they want their work to be there. But again, there are other open access journals, because we don't share. They are so closed within communities, we don't share. If you look at the physics community, they've done quite a lot for the physics community. There's databases where they share papers that they share before a paper is published. The pre-papers they're sharing within that community. It has grown globally where they know that there's that platform to share. With regards to DORA, aligned to the study, I think there was a lot that went into it. There are so many, for me, there are so many declarations and all these announcements that go out. I think we need to move beyond that. It's not just about having these statements. It's all about how do we action. And action starts with having these repositories that we share now physically. When we go out, we start sharing those. Practically speaking of open science, what does it mean for a funder like the National Research Foundation? The review system, how do we revive the review system? How do we put across all these information with regards to predatory journals, conferences, online before somebody applies? They are aware of it, there's guidelines to guide the researchers. And how do we start talking within the region? We're not speaking within the region. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your comments and your concerns. Let me start with the easy one, the DORA one. So certainly in our report, we did sort of suggest, that we should, those initiatives should be supported. In terms of South Africa, I don't think that those statements are actually on the forefront of the work that we do. So my colleagues here from ASAF in the audience, please do put it on our to-do list, is that we start create some awareness and some discussion around this, because especially during the World Science Forum, there's quite a voice coming through for that type of statement. So thank you for that. Charity starts at home, right? So I think training and mentoring starts at home, I'm afraid. And I know it's not an easy one. And there is actually no punitive measurements at the moment in place for that type of behavior. But we have to create awareness, we have to mentor, we have to put it up front. And you're right, Seppo, there's some broad framework guidelines, like the research output policy, with sort of some broad guidelines. I think what will be important is that we look at the publications quality framework, which will come to play. We really hope that it will come, because that will put our research onto the next level so that some punitive measurements could be in place. Seppo, I was here listening to the plea of our colleague here in front, and this is the typical thing that we actually encountered in our report and feedback. It sort of points back to two initiatives that you are heavily involved in, and that's the Research Granting Councils and the African Open Science Platform. Is this type of debate, this awareness, this plea, and my colleague there of IFL, also working in developing countries. I hope you can take this message home, that there's definitely something that we have to do, and yeah, it saddens me, that we have to go to such extremities and to expose young researchers. That's not what we need. Yes, I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Just a brief comment, then I'm going to take one more question. We promised we wouldn't run over.
Okay, let me answer the lady in the corner's two questions very quickly. You mentioned the DORA and the Hong Kong guidelines. We as IAP are starting, or it's been going on for some months, a partnership with ISC, the International Science Council, and the Global Young Academy. So 3 global organizations trying to sit together around the table to discuss exactly where do we go from talking and, as we said, turning declarations into action. What does this look like for assessing researchers for their promotions, whatever it might be, at a global level? So those discussions are starting. It's not easy, but watch this space. We don't have much to say right now. What could be interesting, it'll be interesting to hear from you perhaps after the session, what do you think you need for your students, your early researchers? A 1-hour training session, a 2-hour webinar? How could IAP help? And how could we develop that? And then take it to Angola, and then take it to Ethiopia, and then take it there. If that's something that we can build on out of this project, that could be something very interesting. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Last question, and please make it short.
Very rapidly, I am David Mba from the Cameroon Academy of Sciences. And now the problem in publishing research is thought to address a specific population. Don't you think that the publication should be where the user population, the target population, is most available? That refers to the question about local journals. Because if I were producing information on the genetic improvement of yam, I would be thinking about sending the paper to Nigeria rather than sending the paper maybe to England, for example. So now that is one point. And now, don't you think that the institutions and the mentors suggest journals where the work produced can be published, particularly if they're dealing with young scientists who do not know where. But under the pressure, they may have ideas generated by the mentors and the departments or institutions that for this discipline, these are the leading journals. Things will be considered.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am aware of the frustration because there are so many people who would like to make other comments, but we have got to the end of our time. And I want to make just two very brief points. One is that this is clearly a very important topical subject. There's a lot more to be discussed, and I hope as you go out for lunch and as you walk the corridors of this forum, you will continue the conversation, because there's no doubt at all that everybody feels very strongly about it. The other point I want to make is that what I've heard, and I think we've all heard it, is that there really is a need, and your last point is exactly this, there is a need for a regional and broader collaboration around what we need to do. It's not a case of our country or our, with respect, National Research Foundation or anybody else's one particular institution. It is that we actually do need an international, at least an international approach to how we handle this, and some consistency across the various ways in which we deal with it. And I hope that we can work on as we go forward. I am going to end now. Susanne can have the last word because she had the longest presentation. But I do want to say thank you to all of you, and apologies that I couldn't take all of your questions. 2 minutes, Susanne, and then we're done.
Just 1 minute. And that is, we spoke a lot about open access journals and where to publish, etc. And I think we must not forget that the director of open access journals, which went through many processes to ensure that journals are of the particular quality in the open access field, and that's another resource, and it's accredited, by the way, you know, DOAJ, so that we can at least to point, especially your young researchers, we do find that funders actually say that you must publish in an open access journal, and that's one tool, but there are many other tools as well. Thank you, and thank you very much to everybody.
So I hope it's been informative. I hope now you will all be in a position to mentor our young and up-and-coming researchers and to provide additional guidance in terms of the predatory publishing. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.